Hi everyone, and good evening, and welcome to day 44. I am just sort of sometimes surprised that I have continued every day and not missed, and I've never even been able to do that on Facebook or LiveJournal. So today ended up becoming one of those really interesting days. Earlier, I was doing a lot of family time, being the weekend. I was also doing some organization in the work around the musical practice, specifically because on the weekend I try to plan out the next week based on what happened the previous week. But as for music, which is what a lot of people are definitely more interested in, technically I worked on two completely different pieces. However, emotionally and physically, they were both doing pretty much the exact same thing to me. It was like the same lesson, two directions. I get this a lot lately. Honestly, I think today may have been one of those first times where I started feeling less like I was trying to make sounds happen and more like I was beginning to understand where the voice itself naturally wants to live. So today was a purple day, and that is a lighter day, more technical than growth. Refinement, I guess. I always try to keep the weekends lighter so that I'm not basically missing the weekend. So first I had the brighter session, and that continued. The early use of a learn track with just verse 1A, as I refer to it. If you're really familiar with the song, calling it verse 1A makes sense. As I've said, I'm trying not to go too far into detail due to the fact that I really don't want to spoil with details about the song anything going on about the season. Anyway, unlike the earlier sessions where the material was familiar but performatively foreign, tonight it's beginning to feel familiar, not just as in I've sung it casually, but beginning to feel familiar from a new point of view. And it was there from the moment I went go. And just no mastery yet. Nowhere near any concept of ownership. But it's now a piece that I'm practicing rather than a piece that I only sing casually. Let's see. So the early runs were mostly reconnecting to it and recalibrating. I basically did the verse, the most of the verse, 1A, 6 times. But somewhere around the later ones, the voice really started to settle into this placement that really felt cooperative. One of the descriptions I wrote down afterwards was that it felt like the voice was relaxing in a hammock. It was moving around a little, it was shifting naturally, but it was staying inside a place that it felt stable and correct instead of being managed. So there was a more relaxed nature to it. And that was really interesting because I wasn't really consciously doing technique during most of Brighter or most of the session, but some actual support behaviors and sustained phrases started appearing naturally anyway. Even in repeated phrases. What surprised me was that some of those sustained behaviors are the ones that I'm not getting in Boulevard. So I'm hitting a sustain and holding it in a certain vocal color, and I am writing it. But with Boulevard, I still feel like I'm reaching for it on the sustain. Let's see. The more interesting thing was that Brighter increasingly stopped feeling like copy CB exactly, and started feeling more like theatrical research. Yeah, I'm still imitating the original performance, and it's going to be like that for a while. But my attention really kept drifting more and more toward why certain sounds emotionally existed instead of simply reproducing them mechanically. So there is an initial word of the song, and it's got a bit of a growl to it. I don't really think that's much of a spoiler there, but that growl onset kind of fades after the first word or two into a much more natural vocal tone. And early on, I just thought it was aggression, especially because I'm coming off of Be Prepared as well, where, idiots, and you won't get a sniff, just really punchy, angry, impatient, blah. Tonight, I was really focused on the line, and I started hearing it differently. It's not anger. For me, it was more emotional residue, like a state of frustration or exhaustion fading back into explanation. And it's almost like somebody carrying the weight of scale and patience and process and trying to explain that these meaningful things are not built instantly. Honestly, the more I approached it that way, the less the vocal behavior felt externally constructed anymore. I was very much back into a theater mindset of get it memorized and then really think about what the hell are you saying and why are you saying it? Okay, on to Boulevard, which came right after Brighter. It ended up reinforcing pretty much everything I had just come from, but in a completely different technical direction. Very short late night session, and it became much less about performance and much more about quietly observing where this newer coordination is balancing. And having come directly off Brighter, I intentionally tried to carry over that same relaxed physical approach into Boulevard, and that was immediately noticeable. Sure, the first line has this lonely, and it still took me a line or two just to sort of grasp into it, but the rest of the piece felt significantly stronger and more connected overall. Now, what became really obvious tonight is that the system now seems to be operating inside a much narrower balancing corridor than it had been. It's almost as if the amount that I can pull away has reduced, but in doing so, it's emphasized the side effects of just moving a little in either direction. If it's too little energy, the sound starts falling backwards toward that older, unsupported coloring coordination. Now, too much energy, and suddenly the slowly becoming famous Kermitus coloration shows up and starts compressing everything into that weird, fruity, overdriven sound. And that's probably that is probably an example of what I am doing. And I'm going to hop off later and try to figure out what I just did versus what I was doing in session. Thank you. You've all been very helpful. But the really important realization tonight was that the system itself increasingly stays, it stays online when those drifts happen. Older sessions, if it drifted, it kept going. Now it's it's like having rails on the bowling lane, in as much as you can't throw the ball into another lane anymore, and it's sort of bouncing right back in. The bass section, I walk, all of that. I completely fumbled the first lyric because I keep forgetting which part it starts on at that point. It's happening more and more. I need to really beat myself over the head with those lyrics. But I entered with the wrong lyric again. I knew that I'd entered with the wrong lyric again. I switched to the right lyric. But what was really interesting was that everything coordinated underneath. This mistake was only noticeable in as much as when the change occurred, because the word just sort of transformed into another word, but the voice and everything else stayed locked in. So if I'm singing something like this, it was like, I am singing, and that's what we're doing, and it didn't really waver. The words just transformed. It was really strange to hear. Obviously, a few weeks ago, I would have dropped, or there'd be breaking in the bass line, but coordination is definitely locking in. It's just the steering's going off once in a while. But I think that's a much better problem to have. I think both sessions today ultimately pointed toward the same realization. I may finally be approaching an actual balance point of this newer coordination, instead of just occasionally stumbling into isolated examples or moments of it. It doesn't mean that in any way it's stable, far from it. It doesn't mean in any way I have become stable, far from it. But the problem space itself, it's feeling different now. A while ago, and go check the older episodes, I had this feeling of, can I even get the coordination to come together? Can I hold on to it? And now it's more along the lines of, how do I stabilize inside the correct amount of energy without either under-supporting the sound or overdriving it? Honestly, emotionally, both sessions were surprisingly calm. There was no chasing tonight, no desperation to fix anything before stopping. Both sessions kind of felt like they had already answered the question they were supposed to answer once the observations were there and available to me. Those are usually the sessions that hit me harder, because they tell me more about the longer run rather than the shorter run. Before I forget, no t-shirt today. Today I wore my big tiger. I don't even know what this fabric is, but I'm for some reason enjoying it. And it's got to be some kind of polyester thingy. But anyway, no t-shirt today. I don't have anything else. So, thank you for following along with the journey. If you haven't watched episode 42 or day 42, I just had a lot of fun with it. It was just talking about how I wound up on this journey and talking about some of my stranger interests and my history and how it all kind of comes together in a very strange mix. But I just had fun that evening, and I really liked sharing it. That's it. One last note. Today in Boulevard, I hit take 100. Yay. Hey, little Pyrrhic victories. And tomorrow I will hit day 45. Yay. So thank you for watching, joining in, traveling the journey. And until tomorrow, later.